Isn't it? Right, good evening, everybody, for the second time. Welcome to today's meeting of the Cabinet, both those who are participating and those who are watching on the live stream. If members have technical difficulties during the meeting, then please contact the Democratic Services Officer on call, who will attempt to assist you. And on call today is Katie Brewer. Her number is 577046, and it will also be at the top of the chat thread for members if you need it. For those of you watching via the Council's YouTube stream, please follow the instructions below the video if there are any issues with the live feed. I'd ask participants, when you're not speaking, please mute your microphone. This minimises background noise and will help everybody in listening to the proceedings. Microphones must only be on if the participant has been granted permission to speak. To gain my permission to speak, please very briefly indicate on the chat to the right side of the screen, and I will then make a note and go back to you once the person speaking has finished. Please note that we'll be following the usual Cabinet protocols in which other members of the Council usually only speak once on each item and by giving notice at the start of the meeting. So could everybody please ensure their mobile phones are turned to silent, that they're not used to make or receive phone calls while the meeting's in progress. Please also refrain from checking emails or conducting other business, and ensure that you're in a quiet room free from distractions for the duration of the meeting. As we've noted, the meeting is being live streamed for members of the public. It will also be recorded and subsequently made available on the internet. So can I please ask members of the Cabinet to confirm that they're present when I read out their name, and I'll ask members, I'll ask the attendants of those councillors who are participating to speak under Council Procedure Rule 20.1 separately. First of all, Councillor Whitehead. Councillor Whitehead.
Sorry, my mouth wasn't registering.
Yes, you're out of alphabetical sequence for some reason, Councillor Whitehead, but never mind. That's your status as Deputy Leader, I think. Councillor Alban.
Yes, I'm here.
Councillor Duckworth.
Here.
And Councillor Yates.
Present, Chair.
Thank you. The following members have asked to speak under Council Procedure Rule 20.1. When I say your name, can you please confirm that you're present in the meeting? Councillor Cupp.
Here, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Jill Bayford.
Here, Chair.
And Councillor Pugh.
Here, Chair.
Thank you. Are there any other councillors present that wish to speak under Council Procedure Rule 20.1? No, they don't appear to be, so we move on to the main business of the meeting. So there are no apologies. Do we have any declarations of interest in items of business on the agenda this evening, members? I'm not seeing any. Thank you. So the next item is the minutes of the previous meeting, and Cabinet's asked to approve the summary of recommendations and decisions of the Cabinet meeting held on the 22nd of October, a copy of which was attached to the agenda pack. I'll propose the minutes. Is there a seconder?
Yeah, I'll second it, Chair.
Seconded by Councillor Alban. Unless I hear any objection, I'll take these minutes as approved. Thank you. That's agreed. And item 4 is the Cabinet response to adequate toilet facilities at Thanet Beaches petition. And that's one for you, Councillor Alban.
It certainly is, Chair, and good evening, members, and good evening to any residents who are watching. A petition was received in June 2020 with 147 valid signatures. The petition reads, "We, the undersigned, petition the Council to hold a thorough review of the facilities available around the Thanet beaches to ensure the safety and well-being of both visitors and residents, and to invest in adequate infrastructure to meet the outcome. In accordance with Council's constitution, this petition was reported to Council without debate on the 9th of July of this year. At present, there are 28 toilets open during the summer months. 13 are on or near to beaches and are fundamental in achieving our blue flag status. A minimum of 16 toilets normally remain open all year round. The pandemic presented significant challenges this summer following the relaxation of the national lockdown in May. Additional temporary toilets were provided both at Margate and Botany Bay. The temporary toilets and COVID-19 measures had a big impact on the limited budget of toilet provision. I propose that Cabinet adopt motion 1 and note the concerns raised in the petition and respond to confirm that toilet facilities serving Thanet beaches will be reviewed both by officers and members over the winter season, with the review and recommendations to be reported back to Cabinet in March 2021. I would also advise that the decision of this Cabinet will be reported to Council on the 10th of December 2020.
Thank you, Councillor Alban. You've moved that. I'll second that. And Councillor Cupp, you can come in.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Alban, for reading that out to us all. I was just, I wanted to say I'm firstly happy that the decision has been taken to take forward option 1 on this. I was wondering if it is possible to re-engage and reinitiate the toilet review group that was initially put in place under the previous administration of the council, because I feel as if this is a decision that can be brought about and reviewed under a cross-party measure. And I think by having the review group back in place, it would ensure that that is done so, and to make sure there is a fair say from members across all wards. And secondly, just if I may quickly, Chair, in the budget that was agreed in February 2020, in that item, agenda item 6, I believe it was, section 8.4, it said that there was a budget put aside to ensure that there was going to be a creation of 10 new environmental operatives. Now, I was just wondering whether or not those operatives and those posts have actually been filled. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Cupp. I'm not sure how relevant that is to the petition for adequate toilet facilities at Thanet beaches, but I'll let Councillor Alban respond.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, thank you, Councillor Cupp. No, I don't think that the last matter you raised has got anything to do with the toilets, and I'm not going to answer that. But certainly, I think what you're proposing is something that we should consider. You're quite right. That a cross-party agreement would be a possible way forward, and I'm more than happy to review that with the rest of the Cabinet and corporate management team. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Alban. And I think in response, I think all members across the council recognise that public toilets are an important service that we provide to our residents, and they're something in which residents take a great interest, their availability. And as councillors, it's beholden on us to do the same, and we do, particularly in the areas that we represent. So I'm sympathetic to the idea that there is the widest possible member involvement in those decisions. Ultimately, of course, a lot of it does come down to money, and that's in short supply, not unusually. So is there any further debate on that? I'm not seeing any other members who wish to speak on it. So members, should we take that as agreed?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Thank you. Thank you. We move on to item 5, which is the mid-year review 2021 Treasury Management and Annual Investment Strategy with Councillor Yates.
Thank you, Chair. This report summarises Treasury management activity and Treasury indicators for the first half of 2020 to 21. No difficulties are envisioned for the current year in complying with the indicators. The report also sets out a revision in the 2020 to 21 Treasury management strategy to amend the minimum credit rating of counterparties from A to A- for specific investments. The change will help the Council to continue to manage its investments effectively, given the actual and potential economic impact of factors such as the coronavirus pandemic and Brexit. I move the recommendations.
Thank you, Councillor Yates. I'll second that. Any member wish to comment? No. So members would take that as agreed unless I hear any objections. Thank you. Item 6 is the policy for imposing financial penalties under the electrical safety standards in the private rented sector, England Regulations 2020. Councillor Whitehead is going to make that sound more interesting than the title does, I think.
I'll do my best. Thank you very much, Chair. Ensuring that Thanet residents have safe, secure housing, whether within the council or as private residents, is a huge priority to this council. In bringing our housing service back in-house, we took a very significant step to show our priorities as a direct landlord. With the onset of new legislation, we are extending protections into the private sector. As the local housing authority, we have a statutory duty to enforce the electrical safety standards in the private rented sector, England Regulations 2020. These new regulations require private landlords to maintain electrical safety standards in privately rented homes. This is a new legal requirement and one which has long been overdue. In terms of our approach as a council and as a department, this signifies the importance of accommodation as a whole, across both council and privately rented properties. And it takes an important step towards showing tenants that we as a council have expectations of private landlords in terms of the safety and treatment of their tenants, much as we expect the highest standards of our service and work constantly towards fulfilling those aims. These regulations have applied to all new tenancies since the 1st of June 2020 and will apply to all existing tenancies from the 1st of April 2021. The principal requirements of the legislation are as follows. Landlords must ensure that a suitably competent and qualified person inspects and tests their electrical installations at intervals of not more than 5 years and must ensure that all repairs needed to make their installations safe are carried out. The council will act as the enforcing authority, and we must be ready to enforce the regulations when landlords do not meet their statutory responsibilities, as set out under Regulation 4. The health and safety of our tenants depends on their accommodation. Not all housing is under direct control, but regulations such as these allow us to extend protections to the private sector and ensure that all residents who are reliant on property rental are protected. Under Regulation 11, when in the public interest, it will sometimes be appropriate for the council to impose a financial penalty of up to £30,000 on a non-compliant private landlord. Government guidance requires the council to develop and document a policy which sets out the level of financial penalty it should impose in each case, having regard to the severity of the breach. The prescribed procedural requirements are set out in Schedule 2 to the regulations, and the proposed policy annexed to this report has been developed in accordance with this guidance. Careful regard has been taken of the relevant legislation and government guidance in the preparation of our proposed policy for imposing financial penalties. The regulations both impose duties on us as an authority and give us powers to enforce our obligations. Under these regulations, we are under a duty to serve a remedial notice where we have reasonable grounds to believe that a private landlord is in breach of one or more of the duties imposed by the regulations. The remedial notice will specify the remedial action necessary and require that the action be completed within 28 days. A private landlord may make written representations against such notice within 21 days. In addition, we have power to arrange a remedial action. If a private landlord does not comply with the remedial notice, the LHA has the power, with the tenant's consent, to undertake the remedial action specified in the notice and recover the costs incurred from the private landlord. We also have power to undertake urgent remedial action. Where a report indicates that urgent remedial action is required, and the private landlord does not take timely action, the LHA may, with the tenant's consent, undertake the urgent remedial action and recover the costs incurred. Finally, as previously referenced, we have a power to impose a financial penalty. If we are satisfied beyond reasonable doubt that a private landlord has breached a duty under the regulations, we have the power to impose a financial penalty of up to £30,000. It is important that fines are proportionate and recognise the severity of the breach. Our approach has been designed to align with our previously adopted policy for imposing financial penalties under the Housing Act 2004 and Housing and Planning Act 2016, which was adopted by Cabinet on the 14th of March 2019, and also follows MHCLG guidance in relation to the proportionality of penalties, taking note of the following factors: the severity of the offence, the culpability and track record of the offender, the harm caused to the tenant, both actual and potential, whether the penalty is proportionate to the offence and has a real economic impact, whether it will deter the offender from repeating the offence, whether it will deter others from committing similar offences, whether it will remove any financial benefit the offender may have obtained as a result of committing the offence. Any monies collected through financial penalties must be ring-fenced by the council and will only be used to fund private sector housing enforcement activities to ensure that penalties go towards ensuring a greater standard of safety across the private sector. Unsafe electrical installations can greatly increase the risk of electric shock and fire, and so it is imperative that the council robustly enforces the regulations to safeguard residents living in the private rented sector. Tenants deserve safety and protection, whether we are the landlord or whether it is a private tenancy. I welcome this legislation and also welcome a significant step forward in terms of guaranteed parity of care within the private sector. I propose the recommendations set out in the report.
Thank you, Councillor Whitehead, and I'll second that. And I just comment that I really welcome this policy in terms of enforcement against the private rented sector, because we know that that is a significant sector in Thanet. And whilst this is quite a dry document and a technical document, it is a very important matter. And I'll call in Councillor Jill Bayford.
Thank you, Chair. I also welcome the introduction of this policy, as tenant safety is paramount. I've just one question relating to enforcement, where it's stated that in the event of a financial penalty remaining unpaid, this council can make application for a property owned by the offender to be sold. Could this create a situation where a tenanted property would be sold, rendering a tenant homeless and there being one less property available for rental in the private sector? Thank you.
Councillor Whitehead, do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, thank you very much for that question. It's a very pertinent one. We would always consider the impact of the tenant in a situation such as this. So not only do we have to consider tenant safety, we also have to consider the overall impact on the tenant. So that is something that is incorporated within our fee structure and within the policy in terms of how we choose to proceed. But I'd like to bring in Mr. Hopkins in relation to how we would deal with that situation specifically.
Thank you.
Hello there. Yeah, thanks. What the policy is setting out is that we will use all the potential powers that we have to claim the financial penalties. Obviously, a financial penalty, if imposed, it's very important that we do pursue it. So one of the potential options, a potentially extreme option, is that we can apply for an interim charging order against the property owned by the landlord. What that does is put a charge against the property, and that usually would be something that would convince the person subject to the penalty to actually pay it. It would only be a then extreme case where we would go on and ask for the courts to allow a court order for the property to be sold. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the tenant would lose their property, because it may be sold with a tenant in situ.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Hopkins. So that's been moved and seconded, members. I'm not seeing any further comments, so unless I hear any objections, I'll take those recommendations as approved for submission to council. Thank you. And we move on to item 7, which is the budget monitoring number 2, 2021, and that's Councillor Yates again.
Thank you, Chair. This report is the second budget monitoring report for this year. It focuses on the general fund. It forecasts a gross overspend of £5.2 million, largely as a result of additional costs and lost income because of COVID. This compares to a forecast overspend of £5.6 million in the first budget monitoring report. This current forecast was prepared before considering the financial implications of the second national lockdown. Government emergency funding to support COVID amounts to £2.9 million so far. Additionally, there is a commitment to cover 75% of lost income from fees and charges, although this is subject to a 5% top slice and does not include commercial income. This is estimated at £800,000, giving total estimated government funding of £3.7 million. The first monitoring report estimated government COVID funding would be £2.6 million, which resulted in the council deciding on the 10th of September to utilise £3 million of reserves. Now, the net overspend after the additional COVID funding is smaller, but we also in the second national lockdown. So a further report will be prepared to consider how to manage reserves. In advance of that, it is recommended that £200,000 be transferred from the COVID shortfall reserve to the equalisation reserve. This reflects the yield from an anticipated council tax increase, which will help fund the 21 to 22 budget gap, and is assumed in the budget strategy report on this agenda. The general fund capital programme is showing a substantial underspend. This again is largely due to COVID, as works contracts have been hampered and suppliers have been unable to deliver within the normal timescales. It is planned for most capital projects to catch up during the next financial year. I move the recommendations.
Thank you, Councillor Yates. I'll second the recommendations. And Councillor Pugh wishes to speak.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, Councillor Yates, it's just a specific question, particularly on section 2.2, subsection 6, on your leisure and the associated potential overspend of about £160,000. You know, I understand that your leisure is struggling, as are many companies in a similar situation at the moment, similar companies, and I completely get that. And I appreciate that we won't really know the full picture until we come out of the lockdown and everything. But considering we paid the maintenance fee up front, £160,000, fine, that's the way it is. But if your leisure doesn't come out at the other end of the lockdown in a better position or doesn't survive, God forbid it goes under, what are our associated costs and risks as a council that could potentially impact on our budget and a lot of our revenue? And what liabilities do we have towards your leisure, the staff, any other kind of aspects like that, that particularly could, you know, essentially blow any forecasting that we have completely out of the water?
Thank you, Councillor Pugh. Councillor Yates.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Pugh. And I think we'd all agree that it's in the council's interest to make sure that your leisure, especially the leisure centres, are kept running for the residents of Thanet. One of the key points here is that there is some national government funding. I believe there's around £100 million, which has been allocated towards councils with leisure centres, and we're waiting to get the detail from that to understand how much your leisure will be getting. So there is support during this time for your leisure. As to the full kind of like risks of your leisure not being in a good position after COVID, I think that would require, that's not something I can tell you right now, but I'm happy to provide you with an email, or we can set up a meeting to discuss that further, because I think that would take quite a while to run through. And I'm happy to just bring in Mr. Willis at this point in case he's got anything to add on that.
Thank you, Councillor Yates. Thanks, Chair. All I would add to that is, I mean, the question from Councillor Pugh, in essence, was what if your leisure doesn't survive? What would be the consequences? And I can certainly provide an answer subsequent to this meeting to that specific question, but I would just concur with Councillor Yates that we hope that that doesn't come to pass, and the council is doing what it can to avoid that coming to pass. And there is a planned cabinet report at a future date to deal with these issues regarding your leisure.
Thank you, Mr. Willis. And I just add to that cabinet and officers are very aware of the situation with your leisure, and I know that Mr. Willis is in constant dialogue with your leisure, so it's not something that we're blindsided by. We are well aware. Obviously, there's a problem for the leisure industry in general and of the risks to this council, so something we can explore further. Right, so that's been moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion on this subject? Doesn't appear to be. So, members, shall I take that budget monitoring report recommendations as approved? As I hear anything? I'm not hearing any objections. So we move on to item 8, which is another long title, the policy for imposing financial and publication penalties under the Energy Efficiency Private Rented Property England and Wales Regulations 2015. And Councillor Whitehead's going to do another splendid job explaining that one.
I have the best titles. As part of our ongoing duties towards tenants, the Council has a statutory duty to enforce the Energy Efficiency Private Rented Property England and Wales Regulations 2015 in respect of domestic private rented property. The regulations have, since the 1st of April 2020, prohibited private landlords from renting out homes that are subject to an energy performance certificate with an energy efficiency rating of F or G. The regulations were made to help ensure that those private tenants in most need of more thermally efficient homes, particularly vulnerable people and the fuel poor, are able to enjoy a more comfortable and healthier living environment and lower energy bills. They are also part of the wider strategy to reduce UK greenhouse gas emissions and align with our overall aims as a council to both safeguard vulnerable tenants and promote energy efficiency. Persons from vulnerable groups can sometimes have limited housing choices. In particular, families with young children, older persons, and those with a disability can find themselves in poor quality, privately rented accommodation that lacks adequate provision for insulation and space heating. Consequently, the Council's enforcement activities often involve safeguarding the health, safety, and welfare of persons with the protected characteristics of age and disability. The enhanced enforcement capabilities provided by financial penalties will help to minimise disadvantage and contribute to addressing the needs of many residents with protected characteristics. In late 2019, the Council successfully submitted a bid to the Government's PRS Innovation and Enforcement Fund 2019-20 in the sum of £34,742. The bid was entitled Thanet Cold Homes Finder, a project to proactively identify privately rented homes which have an Energy Performance Certificate, EPC, rating of F or G. The original project was intended to last for 10 weeks until the end of March 2020, but was extended owing to the COVID-19 pandemic. Since January 2020, the Council has been working hard to identify privately rented homes with an F or G rating. We initially contacted 3,400 properties to explain the new regulations and requirements. By July, 390 target properties remained. All 390 properties were contacted, and 90 contacts were made by landlords. We have encouraged many landlords to upgrade their properties, but there are some homes which remain substandard. It is therefore important that the Council proactively enforces the regulations to improve the conditions for the tenants living in those homes. When in the public interest, it will sometimes be appropriate for the Council to impose a financial and/or publication penalty on a non-compliant landlord. There are 4 breaches of the regulations that can attract a financial penalty, with the maximum amount payable in respect of any one tenancy being £5,000. The Council has developed a policy which sets out the level of financial penalty it should impose in respect of each type of breach. The policy also includes the provision to impose a publication penalty with every financial penalty issued. Any monies collected through financial penalties may be retained by the Council. Improving the energy efficiency of homes in the private rented sector in Thanet will help us not only protect tenants, reduce fuel bills, and further extend private sector protections, but it will also help us to play our part in reducing greenhouse gas emissions and align us with the aims of our declared climate emergency. I propose the recommendations set out in the report.
Thank you, Councillor Whitehead. I will second that, and that's another important issue. Councillor Jill Bayford.
Thank you, Chair. I totally support this policy in that people in vulnerable groups are protected through enhanced safeguarding and provided with a healthier living environment. With reference to point 7.3, it's stated that under the Thanet Cold Homes Finder project, by July, 390 by July, 390 target properties from the original 3,400 were contacted, but only 90 responses were received. Now that the project is completed, how will the remaining 300 properties be addressed?
Thank you, Councillor Bayford. Councillor Whitehead?
Yeah, in respect to the 390 properties, we've made sure that we have contact details for those landlords, which is how the initial contact was made. Those that we haven't heard from, obviously we have the contact details in order to maintain that contact, advise them what changes need to be made, and advise them how they can best do that. If those landlords still remain non-compliant, the policy sets out exactly how we can enforce changes and how we can enforce the changes that are needed within the property to make sure that tenants stay safe. But I'm happy to refer to Mr. Hopkins for any specifics of what we're doing in respect of those landlords remaining.
Thank you.
Hello there. Yeah. Like all legislative processes that we enforce, there's usually a graduated response. So what we've done is, the government paid for all the land registry searches we needed for all of these properties. So we have that information, which is final and conclusive as to ownership. They've all had letters and they have been told informally that they must meet the regulations. Once this policy, if it's approved, is in place, then we'll be issuing compliance notices on those that we identify as being non-compliant, and that will require them to provide us with evidence about the property, the EPC certificate, tenancies and stuff like that. If they don't comply with that compliance notice, they can be subject to a penalty, and ultimately if that doesn't encourage them to raise the standard, then the next step would be the penalty notice, and then potentially a financial penalty of £4,000 in addition. So it's a case of if they don't register a valid exemption, they will eventually be subject to enforcement action.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hopkins. No other member wishes to speak on that item. So unless I hear any objection, I'll take it that those recommendations have been approved. So that's approved. We move on to item 9, which is the 2021 budget strategy. And back to Councillor Yates.
Thank you, Chair. This report sets the framework for the 21 to 22 budget. It explains the backdrop to the budget, including the uncertainty surrounding government policy regarding local government finance. It also outlines the internal challenges when setting Thanet's budget. The budget gap is projected to be £840,000. The budget gap represents a difference between the Council's planned expenditure and the level of funding available. Cabinet is well advanced in identifying how the budget gap will be addressed, but this report does not include those proposals. These will be included in the budget report to Cabinet in January and to Council in February. The £840,000 gap assumes that fees and charges will be increased by 2%, and the Council agrees a council tax increase of 2%. If these were not to be agreed, the gap would be £1.24 million. The composition of the budget gap is set out in section 3 of the report. You can see that the additional costs are largely unavoidable. It is worth pointing out that the current budget gaps of other local authorities are a great deal larger than Thanet's. The reasons for this will be varied, including according to local issues, but I believe is at least in part because Thanet's finances are well managed. I think we can all pause to recognise this, and it's testament to the sensible decision making of all members, informed by the sound advice of the staff. Cabinet will be recommending the budget to Council in the new year, once further information is available from the government. We're committed to transparency throughout the process, and I hope members have valued the briefings to date and will take advantage of the briefings of the smaller groups of members. Once we're in a position to do so, we shall share our thinking and plans with the public. We are also asking residents about their views in the annual resident survey. The findings from these surveys, along with the Council's stated priorities, will continue to inform Cabinet's recommended budget. I move the recommendations.
Thank you, Councillor Yates, and I'm happy to second those recommendations. And just to say that I'm pleased that we've already started an inclusive process of consulting members across the Council about the budget. I know that there have been a small group meeting. There's been a small group meeting with Mr. Willis today of cross-party members, and also we've had a briefing with Shadow Cabinet. And I hope that this is going to be a constructive process in which we can work together. Now, clearly, Shadow Cabinet have not brought forward anything to say tonight, but there'll be plenty of other opportunities during the process to talk about the budget. And I'm sure that we'll have some useful and constructive exchanges on the way to Budget Council in the new year. So, unless I hear any objections, I will take that recommendation as approved, members. That's fine, thank you. And we move on to item 10, which is the fees and charges. And this one's correctly titled 2021-22, because I think the title of the last one was wrong on my script. Councillor Yates.
Thank you, Chair. A review of fees and charges has now been completed as part of the 21-22 budget setting process. As referred to in the budget strategy, the proposed fees and charges are expected to generate additional income of around £200,000, which represents an average increase of 2%. Subject to Cabinet approval, the schedule of fees set out in the annex to this report will be recommended to Council for decision on the 10th of December. I move the recommendations.
Thank you, Councillor Yates. I'm happy to second that. And again, there'll be further opportunity to discuss these at Council. So unless I hear any objection, I will take it that those recommendations have been approved. Thank you. So that's approved. And we move on to our final item of business this evening, which is the waste disposal proposed inter-authority agreement. And it's time for Councillor Albert.
I've got all the good ones. Right, thank you, Chair. As members are aware, Thanet District Council is the waste collection authority for household waste. Kent County Council is the waste disposal authority. Thanet District Council entered an inter-authority agreement with Kent County Council in 2010 as part of the East Kent Waste Partnership regarding disposal of household and street waste. The agreement includes enabling payments which are made by Kent County Council to Thanet District Council to support the delivery of the current curbside collection service. The payment is based on anticipated recycling performance and savings generated by diverting waste from landfill. The existing agreement will expire on the 15th of January 2021 with no option for an extension. A new agreement is therefore required to allow Thanet District Council to continue to receive the benefit of enabling payments based on recycling performance. A new agreement has been drafted with a proposed 5-year term. That's 3 years with a 2-year extension option. The current agreement was between 4 authorities and Kent County Council. However, East Kent authorities will negotiate separately for new agreements. The new agreement will not affect waste collection and have no impact on residents. There are 3 options listed in the report. However, I propose that Cabinet support option 1, for Cabinet to agree that the Director of Operations, in consultation with finance and legal colleagues, shall agree the final terms of a new inter-authority agreement with Kent County Council with a duration of 5 years, commencing from the 16th of January 2021 for the disposal of the waste streams listed in Annex 1 of the report, including household waste. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Alban. So you're moving option 1 and I'm seconding that. I've got no speakers on that. So unless I hear from anybody, I should assume that that is agreed. That seems to be agreed, members. So that concludes the business for tonight's meeting. I declare the meeting closed at 18:08. Thank you to everyone who participated, both members and officers, and to those watching from home. The live stream of the meeting will now end, and I wish you all a good evening. Thank you.